Hello and welcome to Lesson 1, Types of Poetry. We're going to cover quite a few types of poetry. Don't feel like you have to memorize any of these poetry types. I just want you to be familiar with them and comfortable with their structure. You can always refer to the Poetry Study Guide in the Resources folder on the course page for a refresher. Before we get into the types of poetry, first I would like to go over some basic terminology that will show up in a lot of these definitions. Whenever I say verse, this is similar to, in an essay, you have a paragraph. In a poem, a chunk of text is a verse. Meter. This refers to the rhythm or pattern that something goes at. It can have a quick, quick, quick sort of meter, or it can have a slow and rolling type of meter. It's what gives a poem a musical quality. And finally, a stanza. When I say stanza, again, similar to verse, it's a chunk of text, but this is more formal in the sense that a stanza is very much like a paragraph. Let's talk about blank and free verse. When I say verse, I'm talking about writing that is arranged with a rhythm and typically has a rhyme. But when it comes to blank verse, it's poetry based on unrhymed lines and a definite meter, usually iambic pentameter, but we're not going to get into that stuff. Free verse is an open form of poetry, just like it sounds, it's free. It does not use consistent meter patterns, rhyme, or other musical pattern. Many poems composed in free verse thus tend to follow the rhythm of natural speech. The acrostic poem, or another form of writing, in which the first letter or syllable of a word, or each line, or other recurring feature, spells out a word. And it's so much easier to show this to you than to try and give you a definition. You've seen this before. It's when a word is being spelled and the first, or the letter of each word, each letter of the word is spelling out a poem. So in this case, the word cats is creating the poem cuddly, acrobatic, tenacious, and softly purring. The ballad. It's a poem or song narrating a short story in stanzas. Traditional ballads are typically of unknown authorship, meaning we don't know who wrote them, having been passed on orally from one generation to the next as part of the folk culture. The sonnet. This is a poem of 14 lines, using any number of formal rhyme schemes, in English typically having 10 syllables per line. This is a very specific in its format type of poem. Very famous one by Shakespeare, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" Lyric poetry is a formal type of poetry which expresses personal emotions or feelings, typically spoken in the first person. Think of like a song, something you're singing about yourself, your own experiences. The ode. This is another type of lyric poem in the form of an address to a particular subject, often elevated in style or manner and written in varied or irregular meter, such as the Ode to Cake. Odes are usually pretty funny. The elegy. This is a poem of serious reflection, typically a lament for the dead. A haiku. No matter at what point in your education you've studied poetry, you're going to remember the haiku. Japanese poem, 17 syllables, you got to go 5, 7, 5, and it usually evokes feelings and the sense of the natural world. An example here: you wait in patience, stillness, the poem alights, a bird on your hand. 575. An epic poem is a long narrative poem that is usually about heroic deeds and events that are significant to the culture of the poet, such as slaying a dragon. It's something big, it's epic, and Most characteristically, it's long. Speaking of narrative poetry, it's a form of poetry that tells a story. Just like a narrator tells the story, narrative poems often make the voices of the narrator as characters in the poem. The entire story is usually written in metered verse. It's a story. Whew, so that was a lot. You're now ready to answer the questions below this instructional video. Please take your time and give this assessment your best effort.